All right. Well, hello. Good to see everybody. So tonight, we are going back and looking again at the different arguments for the existence of God in this apologetic series. And so just kind of want to first kind of recap and review what we talked about last week. And so here that is right here. So we looked at these 6 different, I think it was like actually ended up being 8 arguments. We kind of left the last 2 out, but 8 arguments for the existence of God. And we kind of defined what those were, and so et cetera. So we looked at the one's not up there. Number 1's probability argument, and that's just the fact that we every day exercise faith, and people have done that for generations. It's reasonable to have faith in the supernatural. Therefore, there's a probability that something exists. We looked at the teleological argument last week, also called the design argument, simply that if there's a design, it's only logical that there is a designer, right? And very similarly, but a little different, the cosmological argument, also called the first cause argument, is that based on the idea that the universe cannot have come from nothing, there must be a first cause, something outside of the cosmos that created the cosmos and put the cosmos together. We looked at the anthropic argument, and that's the things about ourselves like conscience or capacity to love or our ability to be in awe of something points us to the fact it's best explained by the existence of a divine being. We looked at the argument from immaterialism. Immaterialism, that's the existence of love, etc., shows that there's more than just the stuff in the universe, right? There's these intangible realities, and where do those come from, right? If you look just at the naturalistic view, it tries to explain where the stuff came from, the matter, but it doesn't explain where about like emotions and sentiments and nostalgia and all these intangible things come from. You have the transcendental argument, which is the fact that there's knowledge, there's logic, there's science, is only possible because God exists, and He is the precondition for all thinking and knowledge. And then we finished up with the ontological argument, and the word the onto part, right, means reality, so the pursuit, study of reality. And that is kind of the thought that God is the being that's greater than that which cannot be conceived, right? And so I know it's a lot of double negatives in there, but He is the being beyond our comprehension, right? Therefore, the fact that is a reality in our thought process suggests that He most likely is. And so that's what we looked at. So what we're going to do tonight is I got Martin and Josh going to come on up and help me out. We're just gonna have open dialogue about these topics. I'm going to ask these guys some questions, and Martin's taught apologetics before quite a bit, especially with what's that ministry, that missions ministry we had here? What is it? Yeah, perspectives. You taught perspectives. He's also taught some of the apologetics. His stepdad taught a lot in apologetics. And Josh, you were teaching on this at Bethlehem Baptist Church, right? Like last Sunday or whatever. Yeah. So Josh is currently pastoring Bethlehem Baptist Church, which is where in Jefferson County? Where's that at? Ditmer. That's right, Ditmer. Just grab a mic back there if you want to. And so Josh has actually been teaching some of this on Sunday mornings at Ditmer. That's pretty cool. Yep. Let's let you guys get settled. So while we're getting settled, what'd you preach on this morning at Bethlehem?
So I'd spent several weeks going through goals for the church. Okay. As I started my ministry there. We just kind of looked at some goals for the church moving forward, and I kind of based that off of 1 Timothy 1:5. Paul says the goal of his instruction is love from a pure heart, a good conscience, and a sincere faith. But he kind of pits that against those that teach strange doctrines. They don't do that. So I started a new series today called Sound Doctrine, and we started with just the scriptures. What are the scriptures? Why do we believe the Bible instead of the Quran and other things like that?
Nice. That's good. Martin, you were at Windsor campus this morning doing the final missions day installment. How'd that go?
It went really good. We had a great group there this morning, and I preached that message for the 3rd time. So
Hopefully you got it pretty good this time. You got it down pat.
I think I have it down now. So it went pretty good. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, excited about the video to show next Sunday too about the church there in Kenya. Well, it's pretty cool. So kind of teased it this morning a little bit, but yeah, it's really cool. All right, so these arguments, and again, we didn't have the probability argument up there, but so you taught on some of these last Sunday or something like that. Which one did you hit on? Did you hit on all of them or just some of them?
No, I just hit on some of them. So I talked about cosmological, ontological, teleological. Talked about one I don't recall you talking about called Pascal's wager, and a couple other things as well. Moral argument. I think you got up there. So
yeah,
there's a bunch, and you hit a lot of them, but there's a bunch more.
Yeah, there are. Okay, and Martin, excuse me. I know you've taught apologetic stuff before, but just for both of you, when you're thinking through these arguments, which one of these is in your mind the most compelling?
I find two to be the most compelling. I'm not sure which one is more, but on your list, I found the teleological argument to be most compelling. You look at creation, and how can you not conclude there's a God? I mean, come on. And this is so much of, that's what Romans 1 teaches us. We have to conclude there's a God. When you look at the design and the purpose and the meaning that we see in creation, to not believe in God, you're just suppressing the truth. So to me, that one's very convincing, and also one about free will. And if the naturalist, so to me, atheists have a flawed view system, because they say that the universe comes around through random processes of cause and effect, right? That the universe, it's not out there to teach us truth. It doesn't care about truth and beauty. It's just random cause and effect. Well, then the atheist comes along and says, well, now we can use rationality to discover truth. Well, the universe is not a rational system, so where did rationality come from? It has to come from a God who has put in us free will to make choices that lead to logical conclusions and knowledge. So I think that's another very compelling argument.
Good. What about you, Martin?
Yeah, I would say the top two for me, the number one would be teleological as well. There's an argument I remember learning all the way back at SBU, the first philosophy class that I took, about William Paley's watch, and just the argument from design and complexity when you look at the design all around us in the world. It was interesting. I don't know. It was probably just like a month ago. I don't know if you all saw it, but it made the news. There was this picture on Mars. Did you all see it? And it was of a square. Yeah. And everybody started freaking out because they're like, wow, there's a square on Mars, like this indention in the dirt that looks like a square. This must mean that there was some ancient civilization there. And wow, I mean, it's a square. And I see people like that, and they're like, wow, if this is evidence for design, what is wrong with those same people when they look at the human body, So I would say teleological, and of course we can tease all this stuff out. And then for me, probably the other one that's always stuck out to me is this argument from immaterialism, because, we're kind of trapped in this material world that we live in, but like so much of what we do and how we operate, actually we operate from an immaterial view of the world, like with things like we talk about justice all the time. Well, what is justice? What is love except immaterial ideas? And so we operate within parameters or within definitions of words and things like that we can't really actually grasp in a material world. So like this other half of how we operate all has to do with an immaterial world. Things like love, which I've had arguments with atheists before as well. It's like, do you love your kids? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, if there is no meaning or power in the universe behind that, or any kind of like real foundation, then love is just chemical reactions in your brain and it's not real. Well, people don't want to hear those kind of things. So, so I love that kind of an argument for the existence of God. Yeah,
I'd say my top two would be teleological, but also the anthropic, especially the subcategory we talked about last week, though, when it gets to ethics, morality, the moral law. If you have no concept of God, there's no divine being, there's no absolute truth, then how do we have law? What's good and evil? It's always going to be relative, right? You kind of suggested that last week, which just makes no sense. It's just, and I teach at Missouri Baptist when we have a little session we do on biblical worldview, and one thing we talk about is we kind of do is this philosophy chart. We lay out, what's your theology, and then what your theology drives your ontology, which is a study of reality, which drives your epistemology, which is how do we know about what's real, which drives your belief about mankind or anthropology, and then it drives your ethics. And we always flesh all that chart out, and we get to the ethics question for the atheist. It's always just a big question mark, because there's no authoritative source on what's good or evil, and really, honestly, they don't even have the language for that. Those terms don't even come out of. They're not even the vernacular of an atheistic worldview, right? So it's always relative, like, well, what society says. But we've seen how much has our society changed in the last even 10 years on what's good and evil, right, wrong, those terms, right? So it's a moving target. So for me, those are the top two. One thing we talked about 2 weeks ago was the importance of understanding the purpose of apologetics. It's not for us to be better at debating. It's not for us to sound smart. It's really an evangelism tool, right? The end goal of apologetics is evangelism. So which one of these have maybe you two found most helpful in evangelistic conversations? And why? And what did that look like?
Yeah. I think, for one, that the teleological argument can be useful, but it's really more useful for those that know more about science than I do. You're talking about the purpose and the design of the universe and how the Earth works. I know a little bit about that, but not a whole lot. I think what you mentioned, that the moral argument is very compelling, even to someone that isn't scientifically involved. It kind of makes sense. Where do I get my morals from? Again, if the universe is not, if I'm just protoplasmically designed and a random byproduct of the universe, why then do I care to not go harm someone? You have no good reason other than you have a moral law put in you that God gave you. So I think that's a really, really good one to start on, a common ground, common base that we all can affiliate with.
Yeah. Now, we used that example last week of the Harvard professor, Peter Singer or whatever, that actually was teaching he did not hold to an absolute moral law. And so he was, proposing things like geriatricide, the killing off of the elderly before. So, but then he spends thousands of dollars, put his own mother in the nursing home, when there's that which gets into the immaterialism concept and a little bit of the anthropic argument. When it becomes someone we know, someone we care about, kind of that worldview kind of goes out the window, And that's really a litmus test for all of our faith issues, right? It's like we can say, oh, I believe this, but then when it's someone we know, right, or someone it's affected by that really tests, do we really believe what we say we believe, right? So that's interesting. Okay, let me ask the flip side argument. So which one of these views do you find the least compelling, especially when it comes to, well, just leave that. Which one of these do you find the least compelling, or the maybe the most difficult to really get into a conversation about?
Well, I mean, I didn't tell you that the teleological was my number one because I'm a pretty simple person. And it's pretty easy to look around and make arguments from that, right?
Totally agree.
Yeah, but I would say the one that's probably, at least for me, the hardest to have a conversation about, and I think I probably never have, is the anthropic argument. Although, C.S. Lewis in his book Mere Christianity kind of hints at a lot of this. Most of that is based on the moral argument. If you've never read Mere Christianity, you need to read it. I've ripped. It's small, so you can rip through it pretty fast, but he makes tons of good moral arguments for the existence of God. But I would say for me, the anthropic is probably the harder, because it's anything that's a little bit removed. Even the immaterial one is sometimes a little tough to make.
Yeah. Unless
you're talking to somebody who thinks about this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're talking to an artist, someone with a very creative mind, I think that's a very applicable argument to engage in. Yeah. What you, Josh?
Yeah, I think for me, the ontological argument is probably the least used.
That's totally me too.
Pretty philosophical.
I'm in your camp. Yeah,
it makes sense, but that's just not everyday language.
Let's unpack that just a little bit. The ontological argument, right? I mean, it's kind of a cerebral thought, like the most unfathomable being. The fact that we think about that is evidence that he is, right? That kind of hurts my brain just saying that. Is anybody else with me on that? Some of you guys are smarter than me, so unpack that a little bit. What's that all about?
So the way I explained it to my church last week is, for something to be the greatest thing that there is, that thing must exist. Because if it doesn't exist, I mean, we would argue that there are other things that exist. So if the greatest thing is to be the greatest, it by definition therefore must exist, or else it's still lacking something pretty doggone important, namely existence, which means it is not the greatest thing. So that's how it kind of works out. For it to be the greatest, it has to at least exist, and then it has to be greater from there.
I think of it a little simpler than that. I'm just kidding. It's my simple mind, but kind of whenever, if you've studied anything about just some basic philosophy, Aristotle and Plato, and kind of one of them, was talking about the particulars. One of them talked about the big ideas. And so forms, universals sometimes they're referred to. So like, for instance, love. What is love? Can you define what love is? Well, probably not perfectly. We know there's perfect love. We know love when we see it. When we see like a love that a father or mother has for their child, and we can say, oh, well, that's very loving. But what is love, right? Or we know when we see a just act, but what is justice? And we would say that comes from a perfect form, kind of an idea or whatever. The same thing with God. It's kind of like, well, we talk about holiness or holy, but what is the most holy person in the universe? Well, that would be the Trinity. And so I kind of think of it in that way, back it up to the original big idea.
Yeah, totally agree. And I'm glad you brought up Plato and Aristotle in their converson of the universals.
Did you catch that he said I'm more complicated than Plato?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well done.
But Plato and Aristotle's conversation of the universals versus the particulars, this is usually I would definitely agree with Plato. Universals give definition to particulars. So God, universal, gives definition to. But in this case, it does helpful. If you look at things like love, you look at things like justice, and then you try to, there is a perfection to achieve, to strive to achieve here. Although we recognize we cannot do that, it forms this idea that there is a perfect love, that there is a perfect justice. And so the ontological argument says the one who embodies all of this perfection is God, or is this divine being. Therefore, he must exist, because we have to believe there is a perfect love. There is a perfect. So that's the ontological argument. Really, I think, in my opinion, stems more from the Aristotle side of things than the Plato.
And unless you're talking to like a professor at WashU, you probably won't make that argument. That's why I think it's less used with just common, normal people.
Yep.
I think it's similar to an argument I think you mentioned by C.S. Lewis. I know it as the argument from desire. It's kind of in the same category, but the idea that we can all understand that there are natural, innate desires that are universal to everyone. We all have a desire for hunger. We all have a desire for thirst. And all of our natural, innate desires can be satisfied. They can be met because there is a reality that goes with them. Likewise, we all have a desire for something more. There's a desire for something that we can't have, something that we cannot grasp in this life. You ask anybody, and no matter what they do in this life, there's always more. Matter of fact, last week I think you quoted Warren Buffett or someone who, what does it take to have enough money to truly be satisfied? And you said just a little bit more. There's always a little bit more. There's something that we just can't quite grasp. But that implies that thing must exist, because we have that, and we all have that innate desire. And every other innate desire has a satisfactory answer. Therefore, our desire for something greater must have an answer as well.
Yeah, it's good. So if you take the ontological argument, and then how is it different than under the anthropic, this concept that we all have within us a yearning for eternity? There seems some similarities there, right? But how, is there a difference there? Is there a difference between the ontological argument and that we find in ourselves a yearning for eternity? You think there's a difference? You think they're similar? So my question is, are all these arguments so neat and clean and compartmentalized, or is there some redundancy, some bleed over in these? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think the way that the arguments of God for his existence work is it's not there's no one single argument that we're going to give anyone that says that's proof. This is a cumulative exercise that all of these work together. They complement each other. They build off each other. Some of them might be more similar to others than others, but they're complementing each other to create a whole picture. The existence of God arguments aren't like a chain where the proof of the strength of the chain is only the strong as the weakest link, right? That's not how the arguments of God work. It's a whole exercise, and you build a case.
Yep.
So yeah, there might be some that are more similar than others. Ontological and desire, I see some differences, but similarities too.
Yep. Yeah, and I think the teleological and cosmological are so similar. They're definitely connected. You almost can't talk one without the other, right?
Which one?
Cosmological and teleological. The first cause versus the designer, Yeah. Those are very similar.
I think the reason why the anthropic and the ontological may have just a little bit of carryover, though, comes really from our worldview. Anthropic comes from the Greek word anthropos, which means man, right? So there's this whole in man, this desire, this problem with this conscience or capacity for good and evil, those kind of things. That has to do with man. And we're made in God's image. And really the ontological argument backs up into who God is. And so if we're made in his image, then anthropic arguments would kind of connect to who God is in ontology.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So you mentioned one view that I did not include, and what did you say that was?
Pascal's wager.
Yeah, so explain that a little bit.
So Pascal's wager is a really easy, just kind of softball introduction to someone that you just kind of want to get the juices flowing and start a conversation. So Pascal's wager, basically, the argument goes like this: it's a gamble, right? So if we die and we as believers realize that there is no God, that we were wrong, we really don't miss out on anything. We still had an enjoyable life, right? And we go into the ground, and that's it. There's really no loss. But on the flip side, if a non-believer dies, and same for a non-believer, if he dies, he doesn't lose anything. He doesn't gain anything. It's a wash. But if we die and there is a God, now suddenly the believer has much to gain. He has eternal life to gain, but the non-believer has everything to lose. So what's the greater bet? What's the greater gamble? Again, I wouldn't rest on that argument as the final thing, but just kind of a way to start the conversation. Like, do you realize the gamble you're taking here? Where is it? Why even consider that there is no God? Consider the risk versus the reward. The risk is great. The reward is even better. Where are you going to place your bet?
Yeah. It's interesting because I remember one writer, I can't remember who it is off the top of my head, but he was writing on the Pascal's wager, and he said, but even if you take us as who follow Jesus, we will tell you that we're happy. So even if it was on the side that God isn't real, which of course he is, but we still are living this is still the best way to live. Yeah. Which again, you don't want to end there, but yeah, I can see it as an introductory, get the ball rolling. Yep. That's good. That's good. All right. Awesome. We don't really talk about the transcendental argument much, but I think I briefly explained that last week. What do you guys know about the transcendental argument?
I think it makes sense. Kind of like what I was saying earlier. Again, according to the naturalist or the atheist, they look at the universe and they conclude that through science, logic, reason, they can understand knowledge, that they can have an awareness of what is real and what is true. But it's self-defeating because the universe never has that goal.
Right.
The universe doesn't care about knowledge and truth and beauty. And so for us to have actual knowledge, truth, and beauty, which therefore leads to a satisfactory, purposeful, meaningful life, there has to be a ground. There has to be someone that gives us knowledge and truth and meaning and beauty. And that source is God. And without that source giving us the ability to know anything, if we had no knowledge, if we had no capability of any knowledge at all, it leads to a system called nihilism, which is just utter meaningless, just utter craziness. The big proponent of nihilism was Friedrich Nietzsche. He died within four padded walls. He went crazy because it's not a suitable way of life to hold that. But an honest naturalist, an honest atheist, if they really carry out their worldview to its logical conclusion, it goes to nihilism. That it has to end there. Yep. So for us to have knowledge, it has to come from God.
It's all random and it has no meaning. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So the word transcendental, that's a pretty big word. What does that word mean? Removed or above. That's right. Yeah. So God is removed or above. And here the knowledge that we have is from a removed or above source, right? It's kind of
Which if you look at John 1 in the Greek, it says, it uses the word for Jesus, says in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Everybody knows that verse probably. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and apart from him, nothing was made that was made. But when it uses the word, when it speaks of the word, that Greek word is logos, which we get the word logic from. Many have said that John, within that word, is this idea of the foundation of all truth, where all truth kind of pours out of knowledge, logic, and science would come from Jesus, and it would make sense. So if you think about it, in the beginning was the Word, and we know the Word in verse 14 was made flesh, but it does come from the same word for logic.
good. So let's do a practical question here. So kind of put you guys on the spot, but I know you're totally going to kill it. So you're talking to someone, having a conversation with someone, and they tell you, say, well, I don't believe in absolute laws. I don't believe in absolute truth. I don't believe in absolute morality, right? Where would you begin that conversation, and where would you take them? How would you handle that conversation?
I would steal their car.
Okay, keep going, and then you get caught. No,
Yeah. I mean, it's you can say those kind of things.
I love it.
Right?
It's beautiful.
Yeah. When you come at them with the hatchet, right? All of a sudden, that's wrong to do. We don't live like that. So this idea that like there is, that truth is relative, that is easy to say in a classroom with a whiteboard with a bunch of students and kind of try to get them to
in
think
the ivory tower.
Yes. But parsing that out, and actually in C.S. Lewis' book, Mere Christianity, he talks about that. He's like, there's this innate thing within all of us that God just kind of hardwired, where if Daniel has an orange and I take it from him or steal it from him, he wants that orange back, and he's willing to fight me for that. Like atheists are the same way, or anybody who would say that truth is relative. We don't operate like that in the real world. And so I wouldn't steal their car, but I would say, what if I stole your car? And they would say, well, that would be wrong. And I would be like, well, wait a minute. I thought there was no authority and there was no truth.
So what if they responded, well, it's wrong because our laws in our land say that it's wrong?
Well, what if we were on a deserted island by ourselves and our laws didn't say that, right? I mean, those are just human laws. Human laws change. The Nazis had human laws.
Yep.
And they said it was okay to kill Jewish people because the law said it was okay to kill Jewish people. Was it okay to kill Jewish people? What's the highest authority? And that's where that falls out from under it. It has no real foundation.
Yep. Good. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, and to that, I would just say, well, what made the lawgivers the lawgivers? What gives them the authority to dictate what you can and cannot do?
Might makes right, they'd say.
Exactly right.
Might makes right. Yeah, that is a skewed view. I mean, it's kind of in a microcosm instead of looking at the bigger picture of things. Yeah, that's true. It's good. Okay. What about you're having a conversation, and you've been talking through some of these arguments, and they're kind of conceding, okay, all right, maybe there is some kind of divine being, right? So you're kind of, God's showing you favor. You're kind of winning the argument, so to speak, in a way that's opening up. So what do you do next? Where do you go from having the existence of God conversation then to taking them to Jesus? How do you bridge that gap?
I can kind of give maybe a practical. So I was in Walgreens about a year ago, and this kid was taking my picture. I had to get my passport updated. And this kid was like, "Where are you going?" And I was like, "Well, I'm going over to Africa to do some ministry stuff." And he said, "Ministry stuff? What are you talking about?" So I said, "Well, I'm going over to tell people about who Jesus is. Do you know who Jesus is?" And he's like, "Don't believe that stuff, man." So we start having this conversation. He goes, I said, "Well, what do you believe?" He says, "Well, I'm an atheist." And I said, "No kidding." I said, "Well," I said, when you look at the complexity of like the world and how it all works, and that like if we were a little bit closer to the sun, we'd all fry. If we were a little bit further away, like we'd all freeze to death. Like everything just kind of works out. I said, there's this thing called the hydrological cycle where it rains, the plants grow. There's evaporation again. It goes and moves over somewhere else, and it rains again, and all this stuff just kind of works naturally. And you don't think anything about that. And he goes, "Man, I do." He said, "I just don't know." And I said, "Well, every painting has a painter, and God has made you special. He's made you in his image, and you're like, there's a blueprint for you in your genetics that God made, and you're created. You're wonderfully made." So anyway, we're having this conversation while he's taking my picture, and we just kind of moved from one step to the other. And I was like, "Well, listen, here's the deal. Because you can see that in the universe and you can see that in each one of us, I'm just here to tell you that God loves you, and he does have a purpose for your life, and he sent his only son to die for the sins that you can't get rid of at night. Whenever you stay up and you're thinking about all the things that you've done wrong and you don't know what to do with that, God says you can put it on a cross." I haven't, I don't know if that kid's still at Walgreens or not, but he did hear the gospel. And I just want to tell you all too, you never know. Like there's been a couple times I've gotten like messages on my Facebook 20 years later, somebody got saved because I did something like that. So you're faithful with it. But that's kind of how I landed the plane. I just moved from the big, and then, and it wasn't just like that. It was a discourse. I listened to him. He listened to me. We went back and forth.
Yep.
And he was like, painting's got a painter. That's kind of cool, So
yeah,
cool, man.
Awesome. Josh, anything you want to?
So to recap, your question is basically if they get to the point where they're convinced there is a being,
or at least
God,
more open to the concept.
How do we work that to the God of the Bible?
So how do you take an agnostic to a Christian monotheistic?
Yeah. So I think you start the same way God did you start with natural revelation, like Martin's talking about, the kind of the theological stuff. He's already convinced that there's a God, that there's a creator. So then you have to convince him of what that creator is like. So you look at creation, and creation gives us a picture of God, but not a perfect one. So you look at a hurricane and you say, wow, God is powerful and strong and fierce and bold. You look at a butterfly and you say, wow, God is beautiful and gentle and delicate and full of design and wonder. So those are aspects of this creator God that you now acknowledge. But that's not enough to give us a full picture of who he really is. So we got to go deeper. We need to go into special revelation. So we look at the Bible and we see what God reveals to us about himself in the scriptures.
Yep. That's good. Good. Yeah, these are great conversations. And I know, there's different approaches for how you engage in the special revelation, like Martin talked about, we're image bearers of God, or you could take them creation to cross. That's what we've been doing in Africa. Of course, they already have a view that there is a God. It's a false God. It's Allah, which that's a little bit different conversation. But yeah, dealing with atheism, one of the more successful times that God showed me favor in a conversation with a young man. He was in my MBU class and full-blown atheist. And toward the end, he was admitting, okay, I've moved from atheism to agnosticism, which agnosticism is not saying there's not a God. There could be a God. I just don't think you can know him, right? So that's a positive. Believe it or not, that is a positive step. I think so. From atheism to agnostic. But then the final conversation that we have before the class is over, just really, really moved into the gospel, to creation, to the cross, and then pointed out, and one thing he said was, what I finally realized is it really took more faith to be an atheist than it does to be a believer in Jesus, because there's so much more evidence. I was like, he's moving along, and so I don't know where he's at this moment, but ended on a pretty good direction, So these conversations are helpful. They really are helpful. But it's good. It's good. So last thing before we open up for a few questions, any particular like resources, whether it's books or videos or anything like that, that might be helpful for the folks here if they want to learn more about arguments for the existence of God, etc.?
Yeah. I mean, so I don't have a one-stop shop book, but a lot of things by William Lane Craig. Tim Keller has some existence of God argument stuff out there.
Yeah, Tim Keller's Existence of God is good.
Yep.
That's a really good resource. Yep.
Yep. There's one, oh my gosh. Actually, I have it written down. There's one, I'm blanking on the name right now. Somewhere in here. Well, I may not be able to find it quickly, but anyway, yeah, I'd start with William Lane Craig. Someone mentioned last week Josh McDowell and those kind of guys.
Yep.
Good starting points.
Yeah. Josh McDowell, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. He's got a little short one called More Than a Carpenter. You got Lee Strobel, Case for Faith, Case for Christ. He's got a case for everything. Case for creation, case for Easter, you name it. He's got a case for it. But those they're all good. They're all good. Just those are all like general apologetics types approaches. They include some of these arguments for the existence of God.
Yeah, you can go like super heady, or you can kind of go more popular. That I would recommend all those that you guys mentioned. I think I've read all of them. Norm Geisler has some stuff.
He's a little harder to read. He's a little headier.
He's a little heady.
Yeah.
And so is like Francis Schaeffer. That's
Yep.
who I kind of started with, but lots of really good arguments. He's kind of timeless. He predicted a lot of the things that are happening now in our culture.
Yeah. You ever heard of Francis Schaeffer? He actually pastored the Covenant Presbyterian Church back in the 60s? Yeah. Pretty cool.
So there's a lot of great resources out there. Most of them, though, like even the newer ones, are using all these arguments that we just talked about. Most of these are kind of timeless, and they may have kind of like a new spin or new information. Or, the other day I'm addicted to Dateline. Does anybody know what Dateline is? Yeah, I drive back and forth to Jeff City, so every Thursday on one way, I at least listen to a Dateline show. But anyway, they're always coming up with like these new amazing things to like solve crimes. There's this thing called genetic phrenology, and they can go to a crime scene. If they find a piece of DNA, like any kind of fragment of DNA or whatever, now they can actually take that and they can build blueprints for what the person looks like. And I just heard last week that this started in 2014, but they've got the science so good now. It's like they actually can recreate a face. And so I just started thinking about that. Like if you have blueprints of a house, think about how much more complex like a human body is.
Yeah. Sure.
But they can take that DNA fragment and they can know what you look like today. And they caught a guy in a town of like 4,000 people. They just posted, "We think he looks like this." And they're like, "That's actually exactly what he looks like." All those things kind of to me point to a designer,
Yep.
When we were building our house, we had blueprints for that. But I think there's things happening so fast. You may hear of that in the next, apologetics book, but they're integrating these new things and these new discoveries into some of this stuff.
Yeah. The whole area of genetics is kind of a newer, I guess, subcategory of the teleological argument, the complexities and the design and all of that. Yeah. Just DNA, and it's incredible to study DNA in light of the existence of God conversations, Yeah, it's pretty phenomenal. Okay, we got about 15 minutes, so we'll open it up for some questions. If y'all have any questions, I'm sure Martin and Josh will be glad to answer them. Anyone? All right, we got one over here, Daniel.
Okay, so this one's fairly heavy, so if you want to punt it to next week, I will totally accept that. But under immaterialism, I'm curious what your specific response is to epiphenomenalism. I read one by, I think it was either J.P. Moreland or maybe as Norman Geisler, and it was fairly heady. And I think the approach he took was that the epiphenomenon themselves become sort of question-begging, because you still have to have something that observes or experiences the epiphenomenon. But I'm curious how you guys would approach that. And once again, if you need some time to...
Can you say that again?
Yeah.
So it's a weird echoey up here, especially my hearing aids.
Yeah,
so,
it's kind of hard to hear.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll try and say that again. So my question is regarding the argument from immaterialism. There is a response from the materialist side that says that what we consider to be immaterial is epiphenomenal, that there are material phenomenon that sort of pulse upward into these moments of experience that get internalized and thereby explain away the immaterial. And I'm curious when, once again, if this
So kind of like an example would be the emotion of love, where it's actually just different hormones releasing.
something to that effect.
They try to apply a scientific explanation for the immaterial.
Collectively, those create an experience, but there is no actual experience occurring.
Yeah, I've seen that. I saw this post by this philosophy guy from WashU, and it said, "This is happiness," and it showed like secretions inside the brain of serotonin. It was like, this is what happiness is, right? Is that what you're talking about? Kind of removed from this idea that like the connection to the material, or it's just like, how would you? I mean, I think I know. I think I know what you're saying, but I don't know.
So
I don't know
for
the
me,
argument.
So I don't know if this is what you're looking for, Daniel, but for me, my thought process on that is to think that those conditioned responses to experiences that we personally have never had before, but we have that experience, and yes, we have a release of dopamine or something like that in our mind. That's the pleasure chemical. How do we get that way? You want me to believe that 13 billion years ago, from a single-celled amoeba, that there's that much macroevolution, which is, we'll get to that in future weeks, but to where we as humanity understand love and understand pleasure and understand enjoyment of other personalities in a way that other creatures do not, that's just such a leap, in my estimation, just like the kid I was talking to, that it takes a lot more faith to believe that all that came from, a single-celled amoeba back in 13 billion years ago than we're simply image bearers of God, who, to me, is just so much more simple, to believe in God. But it is, there are those explanations. Yep. That you're right. You're right. They try to explain the immaterial with material stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say too, a lot of people would say, well, that's just a God of the gaps argument. Well, we can't explain it. And so you're just saying, well, it must be God, right? Well, it must be God, or it must be nothing. I'm going to go with God. Does that make sense? Like Daniel's saying, okay, I can kind of build this scaffolding and say, oh, well, this makes sense. Or I can build this crazy scaffolding that one time there was some lightning that hit this slime pond. And it was like, what did Norm Geisler say? From the goo to the zoo to me, to the zoo, to me, right? So I would just, both of us are kind of like of the gaps, I guess you could say, in that respect.
Yeah.
And I would kind of second Daniel and just kind of remember that all of these arguments for the existence of God are cumulative. They build on each other. So you start, as Daniel did, by going back to the teleological argument and an argument from design of our bodies. And okay, well, if that's what's happening, who made that happen? How did our brain process this fire like this in the first place? There's no way that was just a random accident.
Yeah, where did dopamine come from?
Yeah. But also, I think if I understand correctly, they're kind of taking this idea of a material thing that and trying to deny that it's actually a material thing and more of an immaterial thing. So anytime that someone tries to say that the material thing that we all observe as an innate experience is not real, the burden of proof is on them to prove that it's not real, right? So that's not a strong argument until they prove that it really isn't material. They have to have visible proof of that. The burden of proof is greatly on them on that one.
The famous apologist Walter Martin said someone came up to him one night after he gave a lecture and said, Walter, I don't even believe you're real. He said, I was so tempted to punch him right in the face to prove that I was real, but he didn't do it.
You're a dangerous apologist. You're
I'm
stealing
sorry.
cars. You're punching people in the face. Man,
I told him he shouldn't have me up here.
That's awesome. Daniel's great question. Any other questions? Comments? Snide remarks? Lee's up for the snide remark. Okay.
Well, this looks like a good starting point for another author collaboration. You know, you guys have already made some books already, so this would be a good place to start.
We're just pulling from books that we've read.
Yep, Chuck.
Yeah, I'm a little bit afraid to ask the question. Afraid Martin will hurt me, but
A little afraid to ask it, or else hurt him.
Oh, we're good. We're good.
the Pascal's argument, and I used to talk about that to folks that, you know, if Christianity is true only in this world, it's worth being a Christian for the joy of this world, for the joy you get here. But when you read 1 Corinthians chapter 15, if there is no resurrection, we are most miserable of people. Is Pascal's argument just an objection? Is it just contrary to 1 Corinthians 15?
Context. Why were they miserable then? We're not that miserable now because we live in a free society. They were being persecuted for their faith. That's pretty miserable. So I think that's part of it, that they were miserable in ways that first century Christians were miserable in ways that we don't understand. I don't know that being, you know, if my wager is wrong, okay, I missed out on a couple things in life I maybe would have done. I maybe would have gone to a few more parties, maybe would have spent money here or there, but in no way am I miserable. Matter of fact, I'm more joyful because I have a peace. Even if it's a facade, even if it's fake, I at least have a peace. And I don't know what's so miserable about that.
You know, I think Pascal too. Blaise Pascal was like a mathematician, right? I think Pascal would even say this. If you pushed him on that, he might say something like this: even if you lived 100 years and every day of your life for that 100 years you were tortured, it would still be worth it in light of eternity to believe in Jesus. Because if you missed out on that, you may have nothing, and maybe you only live this once. But if eternity is real and the wager's real, then you've got everlasting life with God. So even to gamble 100 years away, I think probably Pascal, if you pushed him, he might say, I think I'd rather be tortured for 100 years straight. If I was wrong about this, I missed everything. I might be wrong, but I don't think I am. I think he would say that. But I don't want to be like tortured for.
Did you punch him in the face
years.
too?
He's dead.
It's a good question. Any other questions? Yeah, Mike.
So I had a question about the materialism versus immaterialism. On what they were saying with the Warshoe professor getting an impulse for it's like if I see a new car, my eyes may light up, right? But when you're talking about love and you're substituting a long-term choice for what love really is, as opposed to a short-term small amount of excitement over something. So I don't see how the two could, what his professor's response, how it could actually be immaterialism. Because love is a long-term effect, right? It's not just a short-term. Why would the apostles die for what they believed? I mean, that's how we determine love. Christ so loved the world. So just to get a momentary response, doesn't seem like you can swap that out with the two for that argument.
I agree. Thanks. Good job, Mike. Good. Maybe one more. If there is one. All right. Okay. Well, hey, thanks for being here tonight. So next week, yeah, amen. Give these guys a round of applause. Good job, guys. So next week, we begin to unpack the problem of evil. If God is good, God is all powerful, yet evil exists. How do we reconcile those three true statements? And so we're going to unpack that next week. So we'll have a word of prayer, and thank you guys. Appreciate it. and then we'll be dismissed. Let's pray. So, Father, thank you for just loving us and God revealing yourself to us. Because, Lord, apart from you revealing yourself to us, we wouldn't be able to know you, let alone be saved by you and in your kingdom, being able to do amazing things like this tonight, just to have a great time in fellowship and just talking about your word and truth. So, God, I just ask that you would just bless us as we leave here, and God, just help us to look for those opportunities to just to share with others and to evangelize and others and to use apologetics if necessary, all for your glory, so that the gospel would be heard and understood by those who need to be saved. So, Lord, we just love you. Thanks for all you do. In Jesus' name, amen.